I'm Nima Rajan, and this is Forum Daily Week in Review. International Olympic Committee President Thomas Bach officially closed the Tokyo Games, telling athletes that for the first time since the pandemic began, the entire world came together. He said that in these difficult times, the athletes gave the world the most precious gift of hope. The world's greatest athlete, decathlete Damian Warner of London, Ontario, carried the Canadian flag into the closing ceremonies.
You know, when things got closed down in Canada, it was tough, but I was lucky enough to have a community come together in London, Ontario, and support me. But that didn't mean that there wasn't tough times. And I kind of leaned on my coach, leaned on my family and the community that I had, and they pushed me through. And when you finally get to go out there and compete and kind of live your dreams that you've had, and you think back on how you got there, it makes it that much more special. So I think that the struggle that we went through definitely made these games that much more special.
Canada powered through the Games, winning 24 medals, which is the most of any non-boycotted summer games. The Games ended on a golden note with cyclist Kelsey Mitchell of Sherwood Park, Alberta, winning in the women's sprint. Well, for the first time in 17 months, non-essential American citizens and permanent residents are allowed to cross the land border into Canada, provided they are fully vaccinated with a Health Canada-approved COVID-19 vaccine. However, it's still unknown when Canadians will be allowed to drive into the U.S. for vaccinations or vacations, rather. Those crossing into Canada must still follow strict entry requirements, including showing proof of a negative molecular test for COVID-19 that's no more than 72 hours old, and also using the ArriveCAN app or online web portal to upload their vaccination details. Canada's border agents have a tentative agreement with the federal government. They began a Work to Rule campaign this past Friday, leaving long lines of semi-trailers and passenger vehicles idling for hours at some of the country's busiest international gateways. The deal was announced after more than 36 straight hours of mediated talks. While other provinces may not agree with Quebec's decision to impose a vaccine passport system, the move appears to have support from the Canadian business community. The Canadian Chamber of Commerce says vaccine passports or digital vaccination certificates would help to prevent future waves of the pandemic from forcing a resurgence of COVID lockdowns by enabling those with low risk to participate in events and go about their daily lives. The Canadian Forces National Investigation Service has ended a nearly 6-month probe into the conduct of Admiral Art MacDonald. Its decision that there is not enough evidence to lay charges paves the way for Admiral MacDonald to return to his position as commander of the Canadian Armed Forces. The nature of the allegation against Admiral MacDonald has not been publicly confirmed. Defense Minister Harjit Sajjan isn't commenting on whether Admiral MacDonald will be reinstated as Chief of the Defense Staff. The chief of a Nova Scotia First Nation has issued an appeal ahead of the provincial election for Indigenous peoples' treaty rights to be recognized. Chief Mike Sack of the Sibega-Nagadee First Nation says all levels of government must recognize Indigenous fishing rights to help lift the community out of poverty. August 9th is the International Day of the World's Indigenous Peoples. About 280 wildfires are still burning across BC, including several that cover hundreds of kilometers. Officials are warning of aggressive fire behavior later this week at the 557 square kilometer White Rock Lake fire, which is burning between Kamloops and Okanagan Lake, as temperatures rise with no precipitation in the forecast. Cineplex, Canada's largest film exhibitor, has announced plans to launch a monthly subscription program that offers a small selection of perks and discounts at the multiplex. CineClub will cost nearly $10 per month and give members a free movie every month, along with cheaper member price tickets and a 20% discount on concession items. The CineClub membership program arrives on Wednesday. Two Halifax universities are joining a growing list of post-secondary schools in Atlantic Canada, offering free tuition to students who spent time in foster care. Dalhousie University and the University of King's College says the new tuition waiver program helps remove financial barriers and encourage former youth in care to seek higher education. The Halifax schools join a growing number of universities and colleges in the 4 Atlantic provinces that are eliminating tuition fees for current or former foster children. A year after the COVID-19 pandemic forced the cancellation of most Indigenous events, the Montreal First Peoples Festival is back. Until August 11th, the 31st edition of the event will showcase a series of local music, dance shows, and more than 60 movies competing for the festival's Matusi Awards. Up next, a look at stories that happened this week across Canada. Canadian border guards reached a deal with the government. The Canadian Chamber of Commerce pushes for vaccine passports, and Admiral Art MacDonald was cleared after an almost 6-month investigation. These stories and more coming up next. The Taliban took over another provincial capital in Afghanistan yesterday, pressing on with their relentless offensive as American and coalition forces finalized their pullout from the war-torn country. The city of Abac has fallen to the Mujahideen. This was confirmed by Samangan's provincial deputy governor, who said the Taliban is in full control of the city. This is the 6th provincial capital to fall in 4 days. The militants have ramped up their push across much of Afghanistan in recent weeks. 158 Canadian soldiers died during the Afghanistan mission. Thousands more were wounded physically and mentally, which led to additional deaths by suicide. Well, joining us now to discuss the ongoing and developing situation in Afghanistan is Mr. Bill Raggio, Senior Fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies and the editor of FDD's Long War Journal. Sir, welcome to Forum Daily.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
So can you give us a quick overview of the situation in Afghanistan as coalition forces pull out of the country?
Yeah, the situation is quite dire. And today, the Taliban took over 2 more provincial capitals, Forest City and Pul-e-Kermi in Baghlan province. So the Taliban now controls 8 provincial capitals. There's 34 total. 4 provinces are fully under Taliban control. That means they control the capital and all of the districts. As far as there's 407 districts in Afghanistan, the Taliban controls 230 of those as of this time. The situation is extremely fluid and difficult to track. The Taliban are on the offensive. They're taking control of large areas of the north. This is where the major Afghan power brokers are based. And without that base of power, the Afghan government is in dire straits right now. The situation, if things continue down this path, the government could collapse within 3 to 6 months, if not sooner.
And how strategically significant are these territorial gains made by the Taliban, sir?
Very significant. In the case of what's happening in Western Afghanistan, and so with the Taliban, all of these capitals, it's not in the south and the east as many might have predicted. The Taliban focused their efforts in the north and the west while pressing their offensive on southern provincial capitals in Helmand and in Kandahar. They're fighting there, tying up Afghan forces, but meanwhile, they're taking control of the west and the north. And again, this puts the power brokers in a very difficult position. And now the cities of Mazar-e Sharif and Herat, they're under direct Taliban threat. The Taliban is pressing offensives there. The Taliban is tightening the noose around these cities, and they're working their way towards Kabul. It's again, the situation is quite dire. I have not seen the Afghan government, the Afghan military, do anything to be able to stop this advance. They're clinging to control of some cities at this moment.
And what kind of tactics are the Taliban using during these advances?
The Taliban, they're primarily infantry tactics. The Taliban, the Afghan military touts their air force and their commandos, but these are of limited supply. They're very small units. They are elite units. They've been effective, but only on the margins. The Taliban are massing their forces and conducting infantry assaults on these districts and these provincial capitals. The airstrikes might hurt them, but they're not stopping them. And in many cases, the Afghan military and government officials, they're just leaving. That's how the first capital, Zaranj in Nimruz province, fell. They just left. The government officials and the military just left because they were told that they wouldn't get the required air support and other support that was needed. And they knew that the person who was in charge, the governor of Nimruz province, was aware that his time was limited. He could either pick up and leave intact, and his fighters fled to Iran and Pakistan, or they could be overrun by the Taliban.
All right, sir, just about 1:20 seconds left here, but are you and other experts surprised at the speed of the Taliban's gains?
Many experts, as a matter of fact, nearly all I've seen are surprised. I haven't. I've been documenting this since 2014, what the Taliban controls and contests in Afghanistan. I've been warning about the Taliban's rural strategy, to take over rural districts and then press closer to the center. That's exactly what is happening. So I am not surprised. The Taliban waited for the U.S. to leave, for that announcement that the U.S. was leaving. It flipped the switch, pressed the button, and it's going on the offensive.
And what's your estimates around the future of Afghanistan? Will the Taliban be able to take over the entire country?
Yeah, it's very difficult to assess, but if things do not change, the Taliban will be in control of the country. I would say, again, within 6 months. I can't see how the Afghan government can hold out if it's clinging on to Kabul, if it's surrounded by the Taliban in all of the major provinces.
All right, Mr. Raggio, thank you again for your expertise on Forum Daily, sir.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Up next, the U.S. Senate passes a major infrastructure bill, and a Colombian tribunal has found the country's largest guerrilla group recruited thousands of children. These stories and more are coming up next. The U.S. Senate's $1 trillion bipartisan infrastructure plan was passed yesterday. It includes a $65 billion investment in broadband that the White House says will deliver reliable, affordable, high-speed internet to every household. While this may not actually be achieved, it is considered a major step. The digital divide is an issue in the U.S. that became more apparent during the pandemic as work, school, and healthcare shifted online. Tropical storm Fred is swirling just south of Puerto Rico, heading for the Dominican Republic, Haiti, and the southern Bahamas. Experts warn that heavy rains could cause dangerous flooding and mudslides. After a quiet month of no named storms in the region, Fred became the 6th named storm of this Atlantic hurricane season. A Colombian tribunal that investigates war crimes says the country's largest guerrilla group recruited thousands of children. The Special Jurisdiction for Peace said the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, or FARC, recruited at least 18,600 children over a 20-year period. The children were recruited between 1996 and 2016 before the group was demobilized. The tribunal said it will call on former leaders of FARC to testify. Officials say the Taliban seized 3 more provincial capitals in Afghanistan in a blitz across the northeast. The insurgents control nearly 2/3 of the nation as the U.S. and NATO finalize their withdrawal. The fall of the capitals of Badakhshan and Baghlan provinces in the northeast and Farah province to the west put increasing pressure on the country's central government to stem the tide of the advance. A new Amnesty International report says dozens of women have disclosed heinous sexual assaults by Ethiopian soldiers and allied forces in the country's Tigray conflict. Its researcher calls it striking that the perpetrators appear to act without fear of punishment from their commanders. Donatella Rivera tells the Associated Press that all of these forces from the very beginning felt it was perfectly okay with them to perpetrate these crimes because they clearly felt they could do so with impunity and nothing holding them back. Amnesty says the more than 1,000 cases documented are a small fraction of the reality. Poland's governing right-wing party has lost its parliamentary majority after a coalition partner announced that it was leaving the government. The development comes amid a rift over a bill which the junior party views as an attack on media freedom. On Tuesday, Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki kicked out a deputy prime minister who is the head of that party. The small party said Wednesday that it was formally leaving Mr. Morawiecki's government, taking with it the coalition's slim majority in parliament. Nova Scotia, or rather North Korea, is repeating its threat to respond to the U.S.-South Korean military exercises, which it claims are an invasion rehearsal. U.S. officials insist the drills are purely defensive in nature and designed to maintain the South's security. A senior North Korean official condemned South Korea for continuing the drills and warned of counteractions that would make Seoul realize by the minute it had walked into a security crisis. Only 26 people in New Zealand have died from the coronavirus since the pandemic began, after the nation of 5 million managed to completely stamp out its spread. New Zealand is being advised to maintain its zero-tolerance approach to COVID-19 once it begins to reopen its borders. An expert group advising the government, chaired by epidemiologist David Skegg, says in a report that it believes it's possible to maintain an elimination strategy even after more people start arriving. A nationwide railway workers' strike has brought many of Germany's long-distance and commuter train systems to a standstill. Train operator Deutsche Bahn said that as a result of the two-day strike, only a quarter of its long-distance trains will run on Wednesday and Thursday. Members of the GDL union, German Railway Workers, began their strike on Tuesday night. The union is demanding that they receive a 3.2% salary increase and a one-time coronavirus bonus of €600 or $703. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo is resigning over a barrage of sexual harassment allegations. The three-term Democratic governor's decision, which takes effect in 2 weeks, was announced on Tuesday. It came after New York's Attorney General released the results of an investigation that found Mr. Cuomo had sexually harassed at least 11 women. A grassroots nonprofit organization offering Americans free lasagnas recently surpassed its 100,000 lasagna delivery mark. Lasagna Love has been sharing meals with Americans struggling with financial and other challenges brought on by the COVID-19 pandemic. In the past year, the nonprofit has amassed 33,000 volunteers across every state. The group's leaders say they are not letting up on their mission of offering a comforting plate of food to families. Top headlines and stories from around the world this week coming up after the break as the U.S. president stays true to his decision to withdraw U.S. troops from Afghanistan. Meanwhile, the Taliban took over its 10th provincial capital in Afghanistan, and Poland's parliament passes a new media bill that has been considered controversial. These stories and more like them coming up next on the Forum Daily News. Afghan government forces are collapsing even faster than predicted in the worst-case scenario by U.S. military leaders. It is likely too late for the United States to stop the rout, and there's little appetite at the White House or the Pentagon to even try to do so. Mr. Biden has made clear he has no intention of stopping the U.S. withdrawal, and the military is not pressing him to change his mind. Meanwhile, two Afghan officials and the Taliban say the militants have seized the provincial capital of Ghazni. The Thursday capture marks the 10th provincial capital to be seized by the insurgents in the last week. Sporadic fighting continued on Thursday. However, officials say the Taliban raised their flag and the city had calmed after hours of heavy fighting. Lebanon's caretaker prime minister on Thursday called a decision by the central bank to end subsidies to fuel products illegal. He called for an emergency cabinet meeting to discuss the move. The Wednesday night announcement by the central bank is likely to send prices soaring. Lebanon is in the midst of an unprecedented economic crisis. The move was expected, but on Thursday, politicians distanced themselves and blamed central bank governor Riyad Salameh. Greek Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis says recent wildfires amount to the greatest ecological catastrophe Greece has seen in decades. The fires broke out during the most intense heat wave experienced in 30 years. Hundreds of wildfires broke out across the country, stretching Greece's firefighting capabilities to the limit and leading the government to appeal for help from abroad. Hundreds of firefighters, along with planes, helicopters, and other vehicles, arrived from European and Middle Eastern countries to assist. Poland's parliament has voted in favor of a controversial bill on media regulation. It has been viewed as a blow to media independence in Poland. The bill still needs presidential approval. The draft legislation would prevent non-European owners from having controlling stakes in Polish media companies. In practice, it only affects TVN, including a dedicated news station that is critical of the government. The Venezuelan government and opposition are set to start their third effort at talks in 4 years. Mexico will host the round of discussions starting Friday. The discussions this time are surrounded by very low expectations from analysts and even apathy from citizens of the troubled South American nation. The opposition has weakened and fractured since the last round of talks took place in 2019. A day before he is released on parole, Samsung heir Lee Jae-yong has appeared in a South Korean court for another trial. Mr. Lee is among some 800 prisoners being released before a national holiday. Mr. Lee had a year left on a 30-month sentence for embezzling corporate funds to bribe South Korea's previous president. He was separately charged with financial crimes related to a 2015 merger between two Samsung affiliates. Mr. Lee's lawyers say he is a victim of presidential abuse of power, and the 2015 deal was part of normal business activity. Official figures show the British economy grew by 4.8% in the second quarter of 2021 as lockdown restrictions were lifted. The Office for National Statistics also says the economy grew by 1% in June alone, which was the fifth straight month of growth. The lifting of pandemic restrictions following the rapid rollout of vaccines in the UK has sustained growth in recent months. Economists expect further growth in the months to come. New Zealand plans to begin a cautious reopening of its borders to international travelers early next year. Government officials also said on Thursday they would delay second shots of the Pfizer vaccine in order to speed up first shots and protect more people as the threat of the Delta variant grows. New Zealand has managed to completely stamp out the coronavirus, allowing life to return almost to normal. The nation of 5 million people has reported just 26 deaths since the pandemic has begun. A new law requiring food delivery companies in Spain to hire delivery riders and drivers as employees rather than freelance contractors has gone into effect. Spain's trade union confederation said the so-called riders' law that entered into force on Thursday would put an end to the labor fraud that workers in the sector have suffered for too long. But it said the labor ministry and inspectors should ensure compliance through monitoring, evaluation, and reporting. Companies say the law threatens a €700 million industry in Spain. UK artist Annie Nicholson is hitting the road in an ice cream van to serve some delicious scoops and spark conversations about mental health during COVID-19. Since her family members passed away in 2011, Miss Nicholson has channeled her creativity to help cope. With most of her works featured in galleries, she decided to take to the streets to spread her uplifting messages using an ice cream van that doubles as a safe therapeutic space. Visitors can pop in for a quick chat, or they can sign up for a variety of talks and workshops as well, all while enjoying a free scoop of ice cream. All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news from this past week. For more news, you could always visit our website. We'll see you next time.